Nous allons encore écouter des voix, une voix notamment, celle de Anthony Joseph, que je vais donc présenter en français, qui est poète, romancier, universitaire et musicien. Il est né à Trinidad et il vit à Londres depuis 1989. Il raconte sa première vie à Trinidad dans son premier recueil, Bird Head Song. En 2006, il a publié The African Origins of UFOs, un roman qui mêle science-fiction, surréalisme, métafiction, mythologie, qui revisite la tradition de l'afrofuturisme. En 2011, le recueil Rubber Orchestras, qui s'accompagne aussi d'un album du même nom. En 2018, Catch, a Fictional Biography of a Calypso Icon, qui est un portrait kaléidoscopique de Lord Kitchener, le roi du Calypso. En 2019, The Frequency of Magic, qui est un roman expérimental dans lequel un roman finit enfin par s'écrire tout seul. Il est composé de 100 chapitres de 1000 mots chacun. Et il en existe une version audio enregistrée par Anthony Joseph et son groupe qui sort depuis le 25 octobre, qui paraît depuis le 25 octobre à raison d'un chapitre par jour. Donc enregistré par Anthony Joseph et son groupe, et je le recommande fortement. En tant que musicien, il a fait paraître 8 albums salués par la critique. Il a reçu en 2020 un prix de compositeur de la fondation Paul Hamblin. Il est titulaire son dernier album s'intitule Who Will Save the World? Question importante. Il est titulaire d'un doctorat en écriture créative de l'université Goldsmiths et enseigne l'écriture créative au King's College de Londres. Son nouveau recueil Sonores for Albert a été publié par Bloomsbury en juin 2022. Et il est à la fois présélectionné pour le Forward Prize for Best Collection 2022 et pour le prix T.S. Eliot de poésie. J'invite Anthony Joseph à nous rejoindre. Why it's so dark?
Yeah, it's very dark.
Would you like more light?
Yeah, you'd like some more light. Yeah. Hi. Is that the light? Is that?
I think more light is coming.
Oh, okay, it's coming. Yeah, that's much better. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's good to be here. It's good to be here. Can everyone hear me? At the back? Okay. Yeah, sadly I've been, coming to France for many years and still have not been able to speak the language, which is a shame. So you'll have to bear with me. What I'm going to do, I'm going to read a spectrum of work, beginning with some early work, and I'm going to go from the past, I'm going to go into the future, I'm going to read, at the end, I'm going to read some work that's unpublished. So we're going to move from starting in 1997, when I published my second collection. At this time, I was living in London. I was very much influenced by Frantz Fanon, André Breton, Surrealist movement, Ted Jones, Russian formalism, some weird stuff. But I was kind of just discovering my voice and finding myself as a poet. I had a very interesting upbringing as a poet. I grew up in Trinidad and started writing in Trinidad at about 11, when I had no idea of what poetry was or what a poet was. I was just writing, and I wrote all the way through teenage years, and then came to London in my early 20s, and then began to have an understanding of what a poet really was. So I didn't have the sort of formal education at that point. My education came much later. I was already a poet by the time I went to university. So I'm going to read a piece here called Camille, a Small Painting, which at the time it was about the difficulty that I found that Western scholars had in discussing African and Caribbean art. Camille, a small painting. Camille, a small painting. The so-called white lady opposite. The Tive are renowned as Thatchers. Blair, 1987, a veritable hypocaust. Akuaba, it has been. Fantidol, clearly suspended from his neck or libel. 140, 141. Wooden, terracotta, knock culture. Bronze, clearly defined. Infantile, although the face is bearded. Fetish lids, an important mirror. The fewer the lid himself, the lids vary in complexity. Some sculptures are kept wrapped. The fierce body, we removed its garments. 9 days later to be burned, smallpox, African mask. Fetish figure, monozylus, i.e. to represent water out of a single block of wood. Mask of identical appearance, bayaka eyes and the elbows on the knees. Mythical creatures, obo, ekiti, cassava, lobi, modern place names. A woman holding a fan, now bent. Reuben, height, 45.5 inches. Oran, length, 8.5 inches. Camel, a small painting. Okay. This is something called matrices. Head down, walking street, such sadness. So went to the doctor, psychiatrist, psychoanalyst, light blowing through curtains in the room, talking right and chamomile, but eventually, filled with much pain, I break and lay my head on her breast. When day broke him from his sweat sleep, or the optical illusions of the night before, his hands shook himself, aware of the mirror repeating infinity with intense precision. This void in mandrake parenthesis, these beasts, he confided in the paraffin night. He could find it there, in the village, green mouths obscured by matrices. With this movement, when I write, I'm aware of this, also to capture motion outside of a time frame. But in an almost existentialist way, the sublime can be accessed by hyperplane interrogation. Paranoia, resonance, juxtapose meaning, exploit chaos, associative word behavior, patterns of perception, matrices, speech, the language of rhythm is living matter, not fixed as appears on page, but carrying movement, motion of mind and of fingers, directing, pushing, reversing, pressing, curling, squeezing. This movement is what you feel, is what moves you when you read. See my face in spotlight and dead rain. I am bones, dry bones and tamarind seed, bleeding and broke dick surrendering. No more bush, meat, or white plastic jazz, or Ron Jeremy licking a keyhole. I give up, in, out, down, all lay down. Call my friend in New York City. See New Orleans architecture on twisted streets, and see and follow my voice on the line. See where it goes and goes through. I just remembered, you needed me to take this thing so you could, no? It's okay? Okay. All right. I was trying to help a lady make sure she could hear me. Yeah, okay. So I think I'll just read maybe one more piece from here and then move on. Yeah, this book was really experimental. I just completely did what I wanted. There's a section of the book which I can't really, I've never read, I've never been managed to do a full reading of it, which looks, you can't see that, right? There's no gaps in the text, so it's all like solid text joined up for like 6 pages. But it does make sense. It does. It's just difficult to read, especially in this light. So we move on. Okay. This is a poem called A Guava Tree. And this was a poem that I dedicated for my mother. My mom died. I went through a point in my life where every time I wrote a book and published a book, someone close to me died. So my first collection, my grandmother died, like, within months of it coming out. And then Just before this book came out, my mom died, and so it's dedicated to her. I actually get the title of the book from my mother. The title is Terragaton, and for me, Terragaton symbolized a gap in language. It sounds like a word, it sounds like it should make sense, but it doesn't actually exist. You can't find it in a dictionary unless you find a picture of the book. So yeah, this is a word that my mother in a dream said to me while walking backwards up a hill. So it was a gift to me. The word was a gift. So it was a gap in the language. And this is a poem that I wrote for her. It's called A Guava Tree. Her breast was sore. I'd seen her years before, as shouting woman behind the fence and the orange tree across the green from walking 2nd Avenue. She was such a modern poet then, but now appeared to see the doctor. I listened to them bitch, and it got dark out in the shed, still with her and she teacup breast which pained her, waiting. I knew then how it would end. The guava tree is fruitless this year, I'm here, is cut out, down, root burnt. Was my best friend in the yard, okay. The orange tree reached the roof, and the savannah view from hot galvanized, and the wooden trees and the avocado trees, but you were different. So seeing the guava tree burn dead last July, and the doctor, she also dead, then the screams which came from inside the house made me realize that whole chapter of my life was dead, burned, dead, and ended off like psychic travel silver spine, gut cut, then neverness. Genealogy became ash, with the burning brain of 74 years of history was buried, and then 48 I can't explain, but the sadness it came without stopping to see where my friend had been cut and burning murder. The bedroom doors are locked. She's waiting with her lump in teacup, waiting to see the doctor. But I already know how this will end. From the bedroom comes tears and pleas. He wants to go, she begs him no, grinds more tears from her eyeballs. He stands, the bed creaks, he stands, he wears brown, short-sleeved Indian silk, sits in the corner, fixes his boot. There is no music here, an abscess of color. Drab curtains, pumpkin orange walls, but the old woman's ornaments in place. The laminated chest of drawers, the dining table, the dove brown three-piece suite, the photographs on the wall will all be turned around. Even Ursula, at 25, beautiful bust of the princess, her dress appears to be sequined and pink, it is. Her eyes, permanently southwest profiled, has been there since 1970. Surrender. He's leaving. He is. He's leaving. He's leaving. He is. He's gone. The roof heaves with old woman heaving, bleeding tears into her anthurium dress, crying so that my heart twists helpless. The shouting stops, suddenly silent, and then she leaves, and I am not sure how it will end anymore. Okay, so let's move forward. Okay, for this I'm going to have to sadly use my phone now. I hate doing readings where I have to use my phone, but I don't have a choice. I don't have my laptop, but it's fine. I'm going to read the second chapter of the African Origins of UFOs. So I can tell you a bit about that book while we're looking for this. The African Origins of UFOs was something that I wrote, around 2000 or so. I forgot when I started writing it about then. Or maybe earlier, I don't really remember. But it coincided with this big coming together of a lot of Afrofuturist writers, and suddenly there was a movement. There was a sort of Afrofuturist movement going on, and there was an anthology that was put out by Warner Books in the States, which was the first anthology that collected Afrofuturist writings, and they published a couple chapters from this book in that. So it felt like I was right at the start of this movement in a commercial sense. I mean, Afrofuturism has been around for a while, but it didn't become a marketing thing. People didn't realize they could make money from it until about 2000, and then it blew up. As Ishmael Reed said, it just grew. So, the thunderstone. She called them thunderstones because they fell from the sky. May spirits build nest in her bed. She would find them in the savannah on her way back from the market, or in the moist dirt of her garden while clipping hibiscus or picking limes for her dry season menopause. They were smooth, perfect petals of secret black stone, cool against the face, warm and natural to the palm. Somehow she knew them from the eggs of ancient bones, and would test them with a candle and thread that did not burn. The stone ever fell, or the world would end. Wipe them with the hem of your dress and place them in intimate spaces. She would press them in her palms when he broke her bare, and when he cussed, she would pray. Yet these stones she kept, one in every sack of wool. She would say, "You see God face? If you see God face, you're dead." And would place a seamless stone between her hymn book and her soft candle heart. One for the old man's gun drawer, one for her sequined purse, one beside the wardrobe door, between her Bible and goblet of croton, one in black jacket pocket for good luck, lost among camphor and nylon, one to steady doily in tropic gust. She kept them as others kept the eyes of serpents, and would give them as gifts as others gave seeds and fetishes. These stones were not for skimming streams or scrubbing pots, was wisdom she brought with her from the sea. Indeed, some kept scars from rolling under islands. And once she told me, when God dig dirt to make man was black, deeper he go, the whiter it get. As she bent, ripping weeds from round her marigold, spider lily, poinsettia, euphorbia, pulcherrima, fire plant, painted leaf. So when the census man came counting, me one was first to say, "Me is nigga, sir, Negro." But my grandmother, she put a soft palm to my shoulder and smiled, "No, we mixed essence, please. Beetle meat, roast scorpion. We pure coco pañol. Is Spanish, African, Chinese, and Amerindian." Her blood knit hammocks across the Gulf of Paria. She must have known they were meteorite particles, those stones flung far from siderite mines, interstellar souvenirs of biological dust. She came walking over the mountain, across the savannah, with a jute sack of yam and green banana on her head, cocoa onion, crown of thorns, euphorbia splendens, and its toxic sap. Her dress came first, dancing before her with the trade winds. She had walked along precipices and riverless bridges from Cora village through the northern range and upward sacred mountains, down El Tecuch, through La Canoa, Mont Hololo, Soskonosco, Pipiol, Bukmalatras, via La Pastora, Cantaro, and Cora Valley. Okay, I think I'll move on from that piece. Actually, I'll just read, I'll go backwards and read how the book begins. So the African Origins, yes, the African Origins is about It was based on this idea that consciousness evolves through 24 stages, and we begin in water and end in space, and between that there are 24 niches that we go through. So there are 24 chapters, and the book is divided into groups of 3. So you have 8 groups of 3. You have the past, the present, the future, and it revolves like that. The past, the present, the future, the past, the present, the future. 24 times. And you end up with a story that has 3 layers that you read at the same time, and your head explodes at the end of it. It's a bit nuts, but it worked. It worked for me. It was inspired by being in London and reading a book about Trinidad, a guidebook, and missing Trinidad. I hadn't been for a few years, and then there was a story in the middle of this book. It was a tourist thing, inviting people to Trinidad, but they were talking about the history, and there was this thing that happened in 1834 in Trinidad, where slavery had been abolished. It had just been abolished, and a Spanish ship was coming into the Caribbean, and it was captured by the British. And in that ship there was an African called Daga, who'd come from the Guinea coast. So they took this cargo of slaves from the British, and they put Daga in the British West India Army at the time. There's an army, and they put him there, I guess, because being a soldier was the next best thing to being a slave. So he became a great soldier and staged a mutiny because he was missing Africa so much that he decided he was going to walk back to Africa. And I found that very moving, very powerful as a metaphor for the search for home, or the desire to go home. So I started writing, and I wanted to help Daga, so I put him in a spaceship. And the idea was that he and his people are still trying to find Africa today. And which is why when we see UFOs, they are actually Africans still trying to find Africa. So it became a metaphor, of course, for the search for black identity and the search for some kind of mythical Africa. Yeah, but there's a lot more going on in there, but I won't get into that. I'll move on. I'll read some more poetry. Yeah. I think, I'm going to read something from The Frequency of Magic. So what I'll do, I'll read it and then I'll talk, because I don't want to just talk. Okay. But maybe I have to talk while I find my page. Yeah, I might do. Gosh, it's terrible. I never know exactly what I'm going to read until I get up there, and sometimes I can't find the page. All right, I'll tell you a little bit about it then. I'm forced to tell you. So, The Frequency of Magic is my latest novel, and it came out like 2 years ago. It's about a butcher in Trinidad who is writing a novel. So it's a novel about someone writing a novel. But the problem with this dude writing this novel is that he's not really a professional. He's not a professional writer. He's a butcher, and he doesn't have time. So it's taken him 41 years to write this thing, and he's still not finished. He just can't finish the novel, man. It's like, oh man. And the characters, because they've been just sitting around in this novel for 41 years, they get really fed up and decide they're going to leave and have their own lives. So the novel follows them as they begin to have their own lives, and the writer keeps trying to finish his novel, and he has no idea. What's going on. He has no idea what's happening with these guys, because he never reads back. He writes 1,000 words a day, and he just keeps going. And he never reads back, so he doesn't know that the characters are doing their stuff behind him. It's crazy. So that's what the book is about, and there are 100 chapters, and each chapter is exactly 8,000 words long, and you're welcome to count it. But yeah, there's this one chapter that I'm looking for that I can't find. Yeah. Okay. I might have to just recite it off the top of my head. Okay, no, I'll find it. Sorry. It's terrible. Okay, I'll have to read it off here if I can't find it in there. Wow. It's not good. It's not looking good. Literally not a good look. Hang on. It should be a cheap hotel. Let's go. Well, this is a performance in itself. Huh? No. You know what I'll do? I think I will not read this now. I'm going to ask Abigail to read. Abigail's got a couple of translations of a couple of poems in Sonnets for Albert, which she'll read now. Then I'll read Sonnets for Albert and then come back to Frequency.
Joggy Road. De vie, d'amour, de honte. La Syrie rouge sur Joggy Road avec le grain du cèdre dans son air fibreux. Rouge. La vieille voie ferrée et le pont où la rage de ma mère meurtrissait l'obscurité. Ses ongles déchiraient la chemise de mon père, son visage. C'est du sang. La façon dont il regarde ailleurs, puis baisse les yeux, les paumes ouvertes en signe de résignation. La mémoire a une curieuse acuité. La Syrie rouge n'était pas sur Joggy Road, mais sur Silver Mill. Et dans la savane, il y avait 5 arbres à pluie qui pleuraient quand on les taillait, pas 6. Mon père me tenait sur son épaule cette nuit-là. Non, j'observais depuis la route. Il y a un poème qui s'intitule POS-GHI. Ayant attrapé sa première crise cardiaque, le grand homme me donne de l'espoir, auquel m'accrochait, dit qu'il se sent assez bien pour sortir. Il flirte avec les infirmières. Il est à l'hôpital sur Charlotte Street, l'hôpital qui sent toujours le lait brûlé et le désinfectant. Ce même hôpital de la première conscience, où j'ai rendu visite à mon grand-père, après sa syncope et sa maladie, en 1977, après m'être arrêtée avec ma grand-mère au coin de Gordon Street, pour acheter aux vieux du ponche cacahuète et des biscuits Mopsy. L'hôpital des fenêtres, d'où je regardais la fumée bleue s'élever de la morgue, et je me suis détournée du lit de ma mère pour prendre mon avion ce soir-là. 2 jours plus tard, elle a cligné des yeux, fort, et franchi une mort cancéreuse. Cet ancien hôpital colonial, près de Memorial Park, où mon père m'a un jour hissé sur ses épaules pour que je puisse voir passer le carnaval.
Oh. I was enjoying that. That's great. Thank you. Thank you very much. So, okay. So we'll come back. I found it, but we'll come back to it. We'll come back to it. We'll come back to it. I'm going to read these 2 poems that you just heard there. The first one is called Joggy Road. Joggy Road was a road near where I lived in Trinidad. It's a place of great memory for me. It's the only place, the only location that I could remember my mother and father being together. And it was a very, very brief glimpse of a memory that I have, a fragment. And it's not a great memory, but it's the only one that I have because they split up. They got together when my mom was 17 and my dad was about 19, and then they had me, and they just couldn't stay together. They was too young, so they broke up. But they kept coming back in and out of each other's lives. So yeah, Jogi Road is about that. It's about that moment, but it's also about this thing about memory. When you try to recall things from your past, sometimes you're not sure. You're not actually you're not sure if you're making it up or if it actually happened. A lot of times, I mean, I know this happened, but I had some doubts as to where it happened. So I looked on the internet, and I was able. Yeah, it's really amazing that, you know, Google is like a second brain, in that you can find, I could find this exact spot where this thing happened in my childhood. You know, I could find the street, and I was like, yeah, that's where this happened. So that's what the poem is about, the fallibility of memory. Jogi Road. From life, from love in shame, the red sawmill on Jogi Road with cedar grain in its fibrous air, red. The old train track and the bridge where my mother's rage was bruising the dark. Her fingernails ripped at my father's shirt, his face. This is blood. The way he looks away, then down with open palms in resignation. But memory has a curious sting. The red sawmill was not on Jogi Road, but on Silver Mill. And in the savannah, there were 5 salmon trees which cried when cut, not 6. My father held me over his shoulder that night. No, I was looking up from the road. And POSGH. POSGH1. So POSGH is simply Port of Spain General Hospital. It's the main hospital in Trinidad. It's a colonial hospital. It's built probably in the Victorian times by the British, and it's still there, and it's still the place where, I guess, 60 to 70% of Trinidadians go there to be born and go there to die. It's a really important space. And where it's located is in the middle of the city, and the carnival procession passes right in front there. So you might be, you know, on your deathbed, and you could hear like steel pan and crazy stuff going on outside, which I think is great. It's amazing. POSGH1. Having caught his first heart attack, the big man gives me hope to hold. Says he feels good enough to leave. He flirts with the nurses. He is in hospital on Charlotte Street, the same hospital that always smells of burnt milk and disinfectant. That same hospital of first consciousness where I visited my grandfather after his blackout and sickness in 1977. After stopping with my grandmother on Gordon Street corner to buy the Old Bull peanut punch and Mopsy biscuit. The hospital of windows from where I watched the blue smoke rise from the morgue and turned away from my mother's bed to catch my evening flight. 2 days later, she blinked hard into cancerous death. That same ex-colonial hospital by Memorial Park, where my father once lifted me onto his shoulders so I could see the carnival pass. So, Sonnets for Albert, yeah, this is a book that I wrote for my father. I started writing this right after my father passed in 2017. My father was not a presence in my life. He was absent. He was an absent father. He was a father, but he wasn't a dad. He was a dude. He and my mom, as I said, they had me and then my brother, and then my dad went on to have about 12 more children with different women all over Trinidad and Tobago. And my mom had a few as well, but my dad was just like, you know, very reckless with fatherhood. He had loads of kids. Wasn't a father to any of them. Terrible, terrible, terrible father. Terrible father. Never gave me nothing, you know. I got a ring from him which I had to literally take off his hand as he was dead, but not quite. That's a bit harsh. Not quite, but you know. Almost. I will read that poem as well. In fact, I'll read that poem now. Rings. So anyway, yeah, even though my father was all these things, I loved him. I really loved my dad. And people have asked me why, and I don't know. I think because I lived with his mother. I lived with my grandmother, my dad's mother, and she loved him, Whereas my brother lived with my mother, and my mother was not a fan of my father. She was not a big fan. So my brother grew up kind of contemptuous of my father, didn't really like him, but later in his life he tried to connect with him. And this poem actually kind of deals with that, kind of deals with my brother. And it's quite symbolic at the end of the poem to know, what my brother gets from my father and what I get from him. Rings. I only have to look at my hands to see my father. The wide silver ring spans the proximal of my left hand's finger. I remember this ring as a child, asking my father what the raised letters spelled. But he laughed, and like everything else made of secrets, he would not tell. It was revealed after his funeral when we were at the house and the jewel bag get bring out from the bedroom for my brother and I to choose which as heirlooms. The bag held things which were either removed from my father's body as he lay dying or kept in a saucer beside his Bible. I chose the silver and soon deciphered that the raised letters were his initials, A.H.J. in Western typeface. The ring fit firm and right. My brother chose a chain. So yeah, in a way, my brother is still tied to this unreconciled. He never got to reconcile with my father. And actually, I'm going to read a poem that's down at the end of the book, which deals with that sort of lack of reconciliation on my brother's part. Answers are important. So my brother is called Dennis. And I don't hide the names to protect the guilty here. Everyone gets called by their name. Answers are important. When Dennis went to give blood at 6 a.m. that Saturday, the nurse said, "Your father just dead," that his body was still warm and lay as yet unwrapped. Not on this plane, no, certainly dead. Touched him out of curiosity. Dennis said he looked so much smaller in death, as if his body had shrunk within his clothes. That third morning, my brother had come prepared to hear the mystery tales our father promised to tell. What happened in Tobago? What happened between our mother and him? Answers are important, as are secrets unsaid. Dennis took photos. The expression on the face was not grotesque. Besides the half-parted mouth, which kept its secrets and offered no response, no tender farewell. So, I will read maybe a couple more from this, and then I'll be able to get back to the frequency of magic. Okay, so I started thinking about writing a series of sonnets for my father. There's a couple of things happened that led to this book. One of them was being at a conference in Washington, D.C. many years ago, a Black British Aesthetics conference at Howard University, and hanging out with scholars, black scholars, which you're going to hear about in this poem. But the other thing that happened was, after my dad died, just after he died, I did a residency, a very short residency in China with a Mexican poet whose grandfather had just died, and she had just published a crown of sonnets in honor of her grandfather, and I thought, that's what I need to do. I need to write a crown of sonnets for my father. And I started writing it, and in very formal fashion, very formal iambic pentameter, and very classical sonnet form. But my father, as a subject, wouldn't let that happen. He just wouldn't. As Kemal Braithwaite says, the hurricane does not roar in pentameter. So I had to change it. Anyway, this is Breakfast in DC. This is about being at Howard University and thinking about the relationship between absent parents and creativity. That night, after the conference in DC, we broke free of post-colonial tautology to gather in the small room of the writer in residence. We were young scholars, poets, novelists, a journalist. We drank white wine warm and nodded to neo-soul. I saw them recoil from the British resident when, in the marrow dark of 3 a.m., he rightly said that there was nothing like the sweet kick of crack cocaine. At dawn, we drove out in the doctoral candidate's car. We saw the Doric pillars of the Lincoln Memorial glowing in the unclear distance, then the white gasp of the monument. We ordered pancakes with blueberries at Pete's on 2nd Street and shared our commonalities. And what we shared, besides our blackness, was that in our childhoods, our fathers had all been absent. Okay. So, I want to read a poem from here, which is about the physicality of death. One of the things that I found interesting was that when I went to my father's funeral and I had to help carry the casket down, the weight was a lot heavier than I expected it to be. And it felt like it was a life. It felt like you were carrying a life. It felt like you were carrying the sum total of someone's life. I mean, he wasn't, he died, but it felt very much, it's the weight of a life. And I remember thinking, this is what's left, this weight. So this is, what do I know of my father's body? Not even a bottle of duty-free rum or a carton of the Morier. This time I come with both hands swinging, arriving first at the funeral home where you are already waiting in your pillow box, exuding a kind of warmth. You are my father's body, but I know so little of you. I know the soft weight of your hands on my shoulder at the airport. I know your rings, and I felt the muscle of your panic wrist once when we were far out at Maracas and the ocean almost overcame us. I have seen your gut grow into its own sonnet and your head grow gleaming and bald, but today it is your chest I come to know. How rigid it is when I press upon the crisp sheen of your burial shirt, to tread a rose through the eye of your lapel. And I find the pall-bearing weight of your life when we grip the casket's chrome to lift and carry you down to the hearse waiting in the bright yard. Cool. So, I did want to read a couple new things as well, so I'll get that in. There's a form that was created by Terrence Hayes, who's a Chicago poet, African-American poet, who, I don't know, some of you might be familiar with Terrence Hayes. He created a form a few years ago called The Golden Shovel, which was based on a Gwendolyn Brooks poem, Real Cool. And there was an anthology a few years ago in which of a lot of new golden shovels were collected. This is from there. So the golden shovel is where you take a line from a poem that you admire. You take the line, and each word in the line becomes the last word of a new poem. So it's kind of an acrostic, but it's with the word, not the letter. So if you read the poem along the right margin, if you read it down the right margin, you get the line that inspired the poem. Does that make sense? Yeah? Great. So the fun is, as a listener, is to listen out for those words and to listen for where those words fall in the poem. So this is called Four Shovels. And the first line is from André Breton, from Freedom of Love, where Breton says, "My wife with the back of a bird fleeing vertically. She threw verbs and arrows at my skull till I broke like water in her peninsula. A wife who, breathing deep, murmurs coy-like, with the nape of a question for a neck. The more the heat from the galvanized slapped back and the red dirt blew up, I thought of how hard she suffered on that gospel plow, without a suffocating word, with the exact patience of a bird in flight, piercing the web of time, fleeing. I broke her back with an axe of sin, to be buried vertically." 2. This is Kemal Braithwaite, Dear PM. And I know we have one Bajan here, so you're going to know what I'm talking about. Kemal Braithwaite was an amazing, one of the greatest Caribbean poets we had. He was from Barbados. He's the greatest poet never to win the Nobel Prize, I think. But his work was too politicized and too anti-colonialist to ever win a prize like that. Kemal says, "All their syllables of living color and career through the water. Gust of sound and sea blast, and all the windows are rattling like teeth in their jaws. Then the skylid shifts to dim, and syllables of stone are chasing color from the earth. Fear of thunder like a child, like black dada in their roar of living. The blood in the road below was the color of molasses, thick black with love, and this too shall be the arc that frames the devil's career. Suddenly, how the junction get hot. Siren ripped through, and the sound tore straight to the solar capital like sorrow, leaving wounds in water." 3 is Kemal again. "Fling of his wish have caught the sea. Far flung from the fling and the rip and the fever, grass and the scar-red hills of these islands, cut across with cuss until his imagination grew somber. Wash and wish away from the grief of it. Fish and bug and mollusk to have bliss of it. The dreamscape, so tenderly caught in the folds of terror, like a drowned man weeping in the dark abyss of the sea." And then the last part is from Charles Olson. "In this night, I moved upon the territory with combinations." And that's from a poem called The Librarian. "What changes? Limestone strata in the heat pulse of earth, the drone bee in this tree, the firefly in the litmus of night, terrestrial objects of the heart. I moved, leapt from the roof to the plum tree, dew wet, dim was my territory. The landscape seemed diseased and dry with its process of combinations, upon the leaf as a leaf, upon the air as a leaf, the dark waters." Okay, I think, yeah, that's fine. I think I'm gonna go back to the frequency, and I'm gonna finish with a piece from here, which is, it really does stick out in the book. I mean, it is part of the novel, but it's really, if you read the novel, which I hope you do, you would find that it really does, it's different. It's one of the most different chapters in the book from the others. But it's there for a reason, and it's part of the narrative. And it's called The Ark. So, before I start, there's a lot of names. You don't have to be dead to be on the ark. Bear that in mind. So this piece, actually I wrote this in memory of two people, of a brother from London called Spacey, who was a poet, a dub poet, like, Linton Kwesi Johnson. He was the new sort of generation of Linton. He did dubstep poetry, and he died from cancer really young, younger than me. A few years ago. So this is dedicated to him, and it's dedicated to a friend that I made on Facebook that I never actually met in the flesh, but we became great friends. Such as technology. The Ark. Sun Ra was on the Ark. Prince Nico Mbaga, he was also on the Ark. So was Art Taylor and Sonny Simmons and Bessie Smith and Super Blue, all on the Ark. And Joe Text and Geraldine Connor and Giuseppe Logan, even Robert Aaron. The Roaring Lion and Aunt Bunny were abdominally on the Ark. The original De Fosto was also on the Ark. Beat rivers of song upon the Omalay drum, just a cutlass carpenter, no skill with timber, four-eyed fish were on the Ark. Who play in war and frayed blood? Who play in mass and frayed powder? Who prevaricate and ruse, throwing holy powder as ritual upon the Ark, but don't want ink or water to touch their clothes? Who else was on the Ark? Max Roach was on the Ark, and Ras Shorty I, Eric Dolphy, Amiri Baraka, Ras Elibank, and Harry Belafonte. Them was high up upon the boat. Babatunde, he was on the Ark. Olatunje, he was on the bow. Mama Drum, you say you're coming to come, but you never reach as far as the leader house. You never hear his sword off speaker drum boomed up roots all around the village. Bachelor life. And then you hear he bullying 3 women in the congregation, and the shepherd raising crookstick and tapping his foot when the hymn swing. But he's suffering in silence, because he wondering if while he in church, rocking back on his heels, his woman honing him with leader Jim when night come, and he need a see a man to prophesy or to tack back and catch them in slackness. But his faith was firm. Every Sunday he in church. He was on the Ark in brogues. Beatty was on the Ark. Mong and Vino in pajamas. The Wild Moon, fever in his throat. Performance poet and stand-up comic, both were on the boat. And the Ark was full, but more was to come, and they're coming still. Ethel Waters was on the Ark, singing Creole Gold. Octavia Butler, hip good, up upon this boat. The mighty Sparrow, robed in African wax print and dancing as man. Eric Eustace Williams, dead and living same time, also wrapped in kente. Larry Lee, masked and sudden drawling. Fats Waller, Courtney Jones, Winifred Atwell, even Gang Sarah, blown from Guinea to Liketo, Tobago, who had climbed the great silk cotton tree in Culloden with intention to fly back to Africa, but who fell to stony death because she had eaten salt. She was on the Ark. Then the mighty Spoiler, the mighty Terror, the mighty Broclax, the mighty Zandoli, in proper soft pants, throwing vitamins down his throat. He have a woman to crack in Siparia. He have one to crack in La Romaine, another in Dabadi. Zando alive but living among the dead, still cracking bois around Stickman head. Then Pharaoh Sanders reach with Yusuf Latif. Earl Lovelace laugh. He see Eric Roach reach on the Ark, his book of poems still warm under his arm. Eric did not drown, at least not deeply, so he turned his back to the shore and dove in deeper. And when the Ark had 2 days to go before it reached Southampton, here come John LaRose and Charles Mingus. Here come Lord Kitchener in 1957 on his way back from New York. Here come Paul Robeson and Beryl McBurney. Even Olive Walk rode upon that boat. This was the year the great bandit graduated from bandit school and robbed 40,000 men in San Fernando. When the river washed down from the million hills and cleansed the city, and who were drowned, badly waterlogged, and who were dead, badly wounded. And the great bandit came down with his escort and chariot to survey the land, and found poor black folk had hidden in holes in the earth, and in barrels sealed shut with lagly sap from the breadfruit tree. And some drowned, stupid. But the poets were wise and hid in the trees and were never found. The bandit rode on, and the houses of prime ministers were burned to the ground, and all around the embassy route, those grand facades of colonial times were volcanically cast to ash and plundered. Then the bandit moved west, searching for that gold-throated woman who, after making disco love to him one morning, ventured him up to the hills overlooking the city, behind the bridge and quarry, and show him where his own navel string bury, and he wondered how he never imagined his own city as a map. Years hence, the bandit went knocking at discotheque doors, but the woman was gone. She was upon the ark, anointed with olive oil and secret colors. Jack Blake was on the ark, and Dominique Gammon, as was Milton Cardona and Rosetta Tharpe, Odetta, C.L.R. James, John Stubblefield and Yvette Cooper, Jimmy Bain, but not Kamau Braithwaite. He was not on the ark. Instead, Baba, the great teacher, had long since evaporated into air, into language, into sound, into the very sex fruit of poetry. Oil does not dry upon his tongue, nor honey on the tips of his fingers. And the ark drove up to Bristol, Brixton, Birmingham, Leeds, and Manchester too. It swooned into New York, Boston, and Chicago. New Orleans see it too. Then it swing down to Haiti, Cuba, Jamaica, Suriname, Guyana. Remember, this ark respects no boundaries or Archimedes. It moves like a crown on a drafts board any damn where it chooses. Look, it passed through Aruba, Trinidad, Grenada. It move up the Orinoco River, and it never wear necktie yet. St. Lucia get it. St. Vincent see it too. It come up from the southern Caribbean all the way up to Pascagoula Bay. Yes. Stephen Samuel Gordon, Space Ape, was on the boat with the oar. And brother Yusuf Ahmed was on the boat blowing the big abeng. Thank you for listening.